Thanks very much, Paul. For me, it's a real pleasure to be here, but it's also a wee bit kind of out of the ordinary, I would say, because normally when I go to places to talk about social capital, which is really about relationships, people are looking at me and thinking, well, yeah, that's all very good. But actually here, I feel like I'm in the right place because I'm perhaps preaching to the converted. So I hope that what I'm going to talk about resonates with the kind of work that you guys are doing. What we assist Social Capital, we're a community interest company set up really as a bridge between academic evidence of social capital and putting that into practice. So our aim is to try and increase awareness and build capacity of the understanding of the value of relationships. So it's kind of taken a primary focus on relationships. There's an awful lot of academic research out there, which I spent quite a lot of time looking at and finding out that most of it was kind of gobbledygook to me because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a statistician. The other thing that I found out is that a lot of the work that it talked about, or a lot of the effect of social capital, comes from civil society. And then when you go and talk to civil society organisations, third sector organisations, they haven't heard of social capital, or if they have, it's not something that they spend all the time working on. So we aim to increase understanding, and one of the ways we do that is looking at evaluation, because it's tricky in any sort of situation to find out what is the impact and the value of the work that we're doing within civil society. So one of the things that people tend to do is they respond to the number of activities that you're delivering. However, what we're really looking at is the value of human relationships. So again, I think it's something that I hope resonates with this conference today. And by doing the evaluation, one of the other things we want to do, Tony mentioned, it's important to basically evaluate what you do and also demonstrate that and report that to people. So we try and make it visual, what it is that we're doing. So for principally what I'm trying to say is, and the message I give to people is, we need to take a shift in how we think about things. So when I talk about social capital, people say, yeah, but how do you put it into action? Well, really all it is about how you think differently. And by that, what I'm talking about is for many, many years in the third sector, there has been a focus on deficit. What's wrong? How do we fix what's wrong? And that's where the money goes. So you've got a top-down process which is saying, right, okay, this is the problem, this is where we're going to put our money, and as a result of that, what you get is kind of a regimented approach. You have to do what the money says, and that becomes quite tricky, actually, for organisations that want to deliver really what is important to the people they're working with. So this idea of planned services and products, you get power differential, so the people with money and political influence are the ones that make the decision. But as a result of that, the decisions are much, much further away from the people that need the services that we're talking about, and therefore you don't get the right services. So there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of how we define what is needed. So this idea of a shift, for me, focuses very much around prevention. How do we go about prevention? Prevention is a tricky thing, because if you stop something from happening, then it doesn't happen. How do you demonstrate that? That's one of the reasons why prevention is not really being focused on by things like the NHS. There's a lot of talk around at the moment about things like asset-based approaches. What does that mean precisely? There's a bit of, I would say, there's a bit of humming and hawing within government circles about really what an asset-based approach is. And, for example, a quick example is, the government wants to give away assets. They're giving away buildings and that kind of stuff. Is it an asset or is it a liability? So we need to be clear about what we mean by assets. If we take an asset-based approach and we really follow that through, then we need to work in a different way. So it's more about things like self-organizations, communities being able to do stuff for themselves so that they can adapt and use the resources that they have in the community in order to respond to the issues that they're facing, and not wait for somebody external to come and give them money to do the thing that they think is needed. So it's about using assets that are already there. It's about working with people as citizens and not consumers. So public service delivery has, for a long time, been about us consuming these services. But actually, there's another word that is going around at the moment, co-production. What on earth does that mean? In my opinion, what it means is ownership. If you don't have real ownership within the community, then it's not co-production. So we need to become citizens. We need to be in control of the process. Another really, really difficult thing for funders is that you don't know what the outcome is going to be if you take an asset-based approach, because what you're doing is working with what's happening in the community. And you can say what we would like to happen, but community and what's happening around about us and the strengths, you don't know what those strengths are until you go in. So it's an emergent process and it's open-ended, and therefore you can't know at the beginning of the process what the outcome is going to be at the end. The other thing is this word ecosystem. So I think if you were thinking about the befriending networks, you could think about the befriending networks as an ecosystem, if you like. You're all working in different places, but you all have a connection, which is why you're here today. But it's not only about befriending, is it? It's about the world that you live in, the organisations that surround you, the communities that you're in. Each community is different. So the communities in the Highlands are different from the communities in England, and even the communities in Edinburgh are very different from the community in Glasgow. So, you have to be able to work with what is around you, but to think wider than just where you're at. And very important for the work that I'm talking about is about connectivity. How connected are we? That seems like a fairly simple question, but actually it's not normally something that we report on, or we evaluate. If you take this approach and you use this idea of values-based relationships, emergent ecosystems, you're getting into the realm of social capital. And for me, the important thing about this is at the end of it, if you can work in this way, it takes a lot longer than normal because you've got to work more slowly and build trust, as Tony was talking about. But what you do get is an effective solution. So the Christie Commission talked a lot about how we need to transform the way our public services are delivered, and that the third sector and communities need to be central to that. Have we seen the shift yet? I think we're still waiting for the powers that be, for a lot of the bureaucratic processes in the public sector to shift, but we are moving in that direction. And one of the reasons we're moving in that direction is because there isn't as much money as there was before. So people have to look for a different way of doing things. So I've been doing social capital and talking about social capital since about 2002, set up the organisation in 2004. A lot of the reasons why we work internationally is because for most of the time I was doing this work, nobody in Scotland was particularly interested in it. They had other things that they were interested in, but in the last 2 years there's been a significant shift in that, and the Scottish Government and funders are beginning to look at social capital as something which is a critical resource. So how can you use social capital effectively? You can use it, in my opinion, you can use it as a lens to look at the world and to look at what we already see, think about it slightly differently. So this, the idea of this, what we've got here is a group of ants working together, collaborating to achieve something that they couldn't do on their own. This is a very good example, in my opinion, of what social capital is valuable for. So one of the difficulties of the topic, sorry, I should have asked this at the beginning, can you put up your hand if you've heard of social capital? Okay. Put up your hand if you're using social capital in your work. Okay. Put up your hand if you're using it strategically. Okay, one. So, I would say that you could all put your hand up for the first two questions, because actually what befriending is about building on relationships. So you might not be aware of it, but that's actually what you're doing. It's just another term for what it is you're actually doing. The third question is, are you doing it strategically, is the one where there's a shift I think needs to happen. So first of all, it's about what is social capital. So we use this definition, OECD, networks together with shared norms and values, that leads to a shared understanding. With shared understanding, that leads to cooperation. And cooperation is important within groups, within communities, but it's also important across communities. And we use this definition because it includes all elements of social capital within the one definition, which is important. I was in the high street the other day, and there was one of these guys. You see them everywhere, and it struck me that it kind of reminds me a wee bit about social capital, because we see this guy sitting there, and the idea is that he's sitting on nothing. He's levitating. Okay, but we actually know that that isn't the case, that he's being supported by something. People still give him money, though, but the thing is, you don't see the support. And if you think about it, the relationships that support communities and support the people in the communities are invisible, but they are fundamental. If those relationships were not there, then what you get is isolation and loneliness, and we know what happens then. There's a downward spiral. So this idea of social capital, it's everywhere round about us. So this group that's in the room, I don't have any connections actually with this sector other than one face I know from previous work. So I'm not able to say who's connected to who. And maybe some of you know, for example, the Befriending Network UK may well have a very good understanding of where those relationships lie. But do we have it clear? If we don't have it clear, can we use it strategically? So one of the difficulties of working with relationships is they're invisible, but they're not unimportant. I would go as far as to say that social capital, the quantity and quality of relationships within any community, is the operating system of that community. And by operating system, I mean the computers that we have here is running the PowerPoint presentation. If we didn't have the operating system, the PowerPoint presentation wouldn't work, no matter how good the software is. And this is true for lots of initiatives. Something works in one community, you go to another community, it doesn't work. Why not? It's a good initiative. What is it that's missing? Social capital and the level, the quantity and quality of relationships in that community play a very principal role in supporting these initiatives. So basically, we are surrounded by these operating platforms, but we don't think about them. So what I'm trying to say is let's focus more on the importance of relationships in order to deliver what our outcomes are. So again, I feel as though this is something that you guys work with day in, day out. But what is the relevance of social networks? The academic evidence basically says that if you extend social networks and relationships, then you increase people's well-being. So for that reason alone, it's highly valuable. But the other thing about it is you can make decisions based on an understanding of social capital and the relationships. So this diagram, I drew this many years ago, and I haven't updated it because for me it's quite important, a little story that goes with it. When I was sitting at my computer drawing it, and my son came up behind me, he was about 10 years old at the time, and I thought he was going to take the mickey out of me for doing such a bad drawing. But actually what he did is he started naming the people. And he started saying, that's so-and-so in my class. And the little grey face there at the end of the year left. That was an individual who was isolated. So we already were aware that that girl was having problems, struggling in the class. And so what it taught me is actually that we think that way anyway. We just don't tend to express ourselves in terms of social networks, the quantity and quality of relationships. As I said, we're a bridge between academic evidence and practice. So it's really, really important that you can go and look for academic evidence which backs up this fact that increased social networks increase well-being. And that's something that the Scottish Government is interested in. Lots of governments over the world are interested. I don't know if you can read that, but what it says, this is Robert Putnam, who is probably the best-known author and research scientist around social capital, and he says, as a rule of thumb, if you belong to no groups but decide to join one, you cut your risk of dying over the next year in half. So 50% reduction. That's a massive reduction just by being connected. So what do you see here? Shout out. Connections. Okay, yeah. Different types of connections. Sorry? Networks. Yep. Anything else?
Looks like it's quite centralised.
Uh-huh.
Looks like it's always been spread, and then the one at the end is when it's kind of like interconnected or constantly.
Absolutely. And what do you think is the result of that?
Everybody is connected together. It's probably a better.
Quality of life. Okay, yeah. So similar to what we were saying before, it can extend well-being. Anything else about the characteristics of the different networks? Sorry? Explain a wee bit more. Flexibility. Uh-huh. Okay. See if this works. What happens if you take that away? Gone. Okay, so this is actually called a rigid network. So it doesn't have flexibility. It's also fragile in that respect. If you take this one away, okay, so there's still quite a lot of disruption, but it doesn't disconnect it completely. And if you take this one away, not very much happens. So basically, what we get here is, as we move towards the right, the network becomes more resilient. Now, if you think about each of those dots is the same in each of these diagrams, then the only difference is how you connect them. So the relationships increase the level of resilience within a community. So basically, if you want to increase resilience, you have to move towards the right-hand side because that is what increases resilience. So participation and involvement and ownership help us move towards the right-hand side. Any other comments before I move on? Like a safety net. Yeah. Sorry? A support network. A befriending network, even. So, social capital, the impact of social capital, what we're trying to achieve is, this is a roundabout, and basically the impact of using social capital, what it does, and I don't know if you can read that either, it says, investing in social capital increases capacity to self-organize and move from dependency towards resilience. But it doesn't happen on its own. So the idea that you can take money away from the civil society sector and community will just happen, like the idea of the big society, that's not actually how it works. So, for example, in this case is a roundabout. Somebody had to design the roundabout and somebody had to build it. Then people can use it. So organizing self-organization is part of the picture that we need to think about if we want to get to this place of self-organization and resilience. I talked before about evaluation. Often what we evaluate is what is delivered. Right? So the number of activities, the number of people, the number of qualifications, the number of jobs. Okay, but actually it's more than that because there's lots and lots of activities which do that, but which ones are the ones that are good? How do we know which are the ones that make the real difference? So it's more, in this realm, it's more about how you deliver it and the impact that that has on the relationships and the community. So one of the things that I really like in this is you begin to talk about friendship. That's not something you tend to hear about when people are writing business plans. Maybe in this case it's slightly different because that is fundamental to what you're doing, but that's why I think there's a real resonance with what it is that you're doing. It's how you deliver it. The other thing that people say about communities and social capital is it's very, very difficult to evaluate because each community is different. Okay, that's true, but so is every individual. But we have a basic blueprint. So every individual is unique, but there are basic elements which are consistent. And within social capital, these are the elements which are consistent. So shared norms and values, trust and reciprocity, networks. Tony talked about trust He talked about most of the things that are in this: shared understanding, connections, trust, reciprocity. So we are surrounded, as I said before, it's an invisible element of what we do. Social capital is always there. It always has been. It's not something that was invented. It's like oxygen in the air. We didn't used to know that oxygen was there, but we noticed if it wasn't there, whether we knew what it was called or not. Social capital is the same. You really notice it if you don't have it. So if it is important, then surely it's worth learning more about it so that we can use it strategically. So it's a case of working out different elements of these. So shared norms and values, you can spend a lot of time thinking about that, but really what it leads to is shared understanding. If you've got shared understanding, you can achieve a lot because it leads to trust. You can't force people to trust each other, but you can provide an environment where they have the opportunity to get to know each other. An example is this conference here today. How much chat was going on at coffee time? That's because you've got relationships, you're building those relationships based on shared understanding. And then networks, which is the typical, in the 1970s, is everybody had to have a huge network. But it's not just about numbers. It's also about quality of those relationships and the mix, depending on what it is that you want to deliver. So this is a quick example of a project that we were involved with, a Monday Club in Govan. There's lots and lots and lots of lunch clubs are around the country, so what was different about this? The aim of the Monday Club was to build effective network of relationships to provide easier and quicker access to community and public services for older residents, in partnership with the local housing association. The local housing association was the client for our organisation, but what they did not want is the older people to become dependent on the housing association because they didn't have the resources to deliver. So they wanted them to become self-organising. As a result, elderly residents found the process of accessing support less complicated and time-consuming. They also felt supported to more effectively self-manage their lives while being able to continue living in the community even when faced with difficult situations. So as a result of that safety network that built up, they basically became more involved and therefore more active and healthier. And we provide them with three basic things. A place to have a lunch every week at subsidised level, a healthy meal. We worked with a local community transport organisation to take them on visits if they wanted to. And we also provided IT room where they taught each other computers. And again, the reason we did it is that the evidence shows that the more social capital people have access to, the better they perceive their own health. So this is a picture of their Christmas party, one of their Christmas parties, which we supported them to do, but they basically organised the whole thing. So the outcomes, and these are typical evaluations, 61 members within 2 years, all the different things that they did. Then here we've got examples of, typical evaluation. The 80% reported positive effect on their health. 70% that meeting people in friendship was important. They also stayed connected to their families because they could use IT better. And importantly, they didn't have to go if they didn't want to go. And if they did go to the IT class, they didn't even have to do the IT. It was totally up to them what they did. What's different about the way that we did that? So far, nothing. On the surface, doesn't look like it different to any other thing. What we did is everything we did was focused on building relationships. That was our principal aim. This is the information, the evaluation that the funders needed. But what we did is we plotted the increase in relationships. And I would imagine that all of you will be able to see these kind of networks in your minds as well. And as those relationships built, this is over 18 months, what we got is, so the blue dots here are the people. And you can see that some people were less connected, but in here you've got a significant group, a resilient group of individuals that were able to make a decision to set up their own organisation on their own. That's how we made decisions, by focusing on what built most relationships, by them making decisions and us helping them deliver it. And that's to show you that they really were real people. And that was us on a trip to Millport, and it was a brilliant day, and we had lots of ice cream. The lady at the back there, her name is Ruby, And Ruby used to come to everything, but she refused to have anything to do with the computers. And she said, I enjoy networking, but I don't want to internet work. So, question for you. Where do you think you are on the three different? I would guess that you're not here. I would guess that probably this is where we are. Yeah? Okay, so what I'm saying is that you already do it. You're already able to look at the world through a social capital perspective. If this is where we are, do you want to go here? Or are you happy where you are? So one of the positive outcomes of befriending is that people become more connected and connected to other things that are happening in the community, which in turn means that your organisation needs to be well connected in order to know where to take these people on. Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to point out is that that it's been very difficult to do an evaluation in social capital. As I said, most of it has been done through academic circles, and they do all the statistical analysis, which is kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's difficult to use in practice. So we've developed some online tools, which what we do is we interview. So the picture on the left there, we interview individuals and we build a social network map of what they do. And we also have a tool called the Social Capital Compass, which you collect evidence, all the evidence that you're already collecting, you can add it into this system. You've got a benchmark, a now, and a planning, so you can plot change over time. And this is an example of the social network analysis that you see. So the picture on the left here is the benchmark. So you start off, most people have got some level of networks already, but we need to show that we're moving towards a place where people are more connected. And as I said before, it's not just about numbers, so the total number here goes up, so from 173 to 416. However, the system also gives you the quality of those relationships. So bonding, bridging, linking. Bonding is membership connections within a membership, within a community. Bridging is connections with individuals who are in a similar position outside that community, which brings ideas and knowledge and new resources. And linking is a vertical relationship with people in a position of power or influence, so that could be money or finance. And finally, down the bottom as well, what we also do is we do a determination of the amount of trust that has been built through those relationships. This is information which adds to the other evaluation you're doing, but it also can be used in terms of deciding where you need to put some effort. If what you want to do is build bonding social capital, but you don't have enough of it, then you start work that will build that, or likewise if it's linking that you're looking for. So, basically that's my presentation, and the idea is, can befriending organisations make use of social capital effectively, and if so, how? Something to leave you with.
Okay, same process as last time. We're going to take some questions from the floor now. Colin. First one.
I'm Martha from Evaluation Support Scotland, and so I really want to talk to you now about, because we're beginning to be asked to do more and more work around supporting people to evaluate exactly this kind of stuff, asset-based stuff. And I was just interested to know a little bit more about how you measure the quality of different types of relationships, because I think one of the issues, certainly when I used to work for Befriending Networks, we were thinking a lot about the difference between loneliness and social isolation, and that you can still be very lonely even if you're very well connected, if you like. You might have hundreds of people around you and be lonely. So I'm just interested in unpacking that a little bit around where does the quality, how do you think about the different quality of relationships?
An interesting question. What the academic evidence says is that the worst position to be in is to have few relationships. Okay, so that tends to lead to isolation. How we go about looking at the quality of relationships is, so first of all, it's quantity, so how many relationships do you have? Then it's about quality. So, for example, a difference in quality will be if you are working in a rural area, what you will tend to find is there's high levels of bonding going on already. Everybody knows everybody already, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of time trying to get people to know each other even better. So what you would probably be doing is looking at building relationships that bring new resources and new ideas, which is called bridging social capital. And you find out the quality by identifying what is your membership, what is your community, and if the connections are within that community, then they're bonding. If they're outside that community, they're either bridging or they're linking. So it depends on the context, and it depends on the community that you're working with and the boundaries of that community. The other thing is about trust. So we don't only do the numbers of those relationships, we then follow up and find out whether or not people are working, connecting and communicating with each other, and if those relationships lead to them getting valuable return, if you like, which is identified in the trust measurement. So if you might have lots and lots of good relationships, but they might not be trusting relationships. And I think there would be a correlation between trust and this idea of loneliness, even if you're hyper-connected.
And do you think you need all types of relationship for a really strong network?
Again, it depends very much on what it is that you're doing and what you want to do. So what I would say is, depending on the context, so in a football club, what you want your football supporters to do is support only you. You don't really want them going around saying, well, I support this team and I support that team as well. So, in that context, you want them to be pretty heavily bounded. But if you're working in somewhere like South Africa and you've got factions that are in conflict, then what you want to do is you want them to build bridges between each other. So you need to focus on things that would do that. So depending... and then if you come into a situation where you're looking at kids or older people, then children need a lot of bonding. Older people also need a lot of bonding. People, middle-aged people who are working age, they tend to need a lot more bridging. So depending on your situation in life and where you live, you will need different types of social capital, different kinds of relationship. The other thing I would say is that everybody belongs to multiple communities. So in each of those communities, the social capital mix and requirements will be different. So you need to be careful that you're focusing on the bit that you really want to focus on.
Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to ask, I found that very thought-provoking because I think about the service that I'm providing, which is providing individual volunteers to go and see people who have nobody. And if we're measuring social capital and evaluating it on the basis of how many connections somebody has, for my service, that may be the only connection. And whilst I'm encouraging individual volunteers to try and make other connections with these people, for a lot of people, they simply can't. So I suppose that I'm worried about there being an evaluation based on the numbers, because for many of my clients, as I would call them, there may only be that one. So I would kind of caution against maybe seeing numbers as the only answer. It may be about the quality of that individual relationship, because that's what I'm seeing now. It's very difficult to get a volunteer to spend enough time to take somebody out to a lunch club to meet other people. It may be that befriending happens in a different way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think numbers, you need to be careful, but it's to do with the context. And so the Social Capital Compass, which is a reporting methodology, it's a self-analysis, so you give yourself numbers, but you have to back it up with evidence. So really what you're saying is that you would normally report on that individual anecdotally. You would give a description of their journey, what happened before they came in, where they are now. So what we are saying is that the social capital evaluation does not stand on its own. It's an additional element which adds to your understanding of why this is important. It's not necessarily about saying this, befriending is better than working with kids in football, for example. Everything is different, so you need to back that with an argument about why that's important, but it's also having the knowledge to be able to say this is only one relationship, but that one relationship made a huge difference to this individual because then they were able to, the connection, that one connection they made may have transformed their life. That needs to be backed up. So it's not on its own going to be everything. It's just additional, deeper understanding of why you work in this way.
Hi, I'm Ricky from Home Help Me. We're slightly different because we're a private company, and we do a lot of companionship services for elderly people. And we're just mindful that there is also social responsibility attached to that. So we're looking at things that we can do. There's quite a big community spirit kind of whereabouts we are. Is there opportunities to work with companies like yourself, or can you kind of point us to where we might go to kind of develop those skills? So not necessarily to become dependent on you, but to get advice.
Yeah, the way we work is, as I said, to raise people's understanding of social capital, but then to build their capacity to use social capital. So we are working with Voluntary Action Fund. We have been for the last 3 years. We've got a strategic partnership with them, and because they work in this way already. But what they didn't do is they didn't do it strategically, and they didn't know how to maximise that. So we've built internal capacity first and foremost, so they're able to use it externally. And now we're beginning to get to the point, after some 4 years working with board and staff, to using the social capital evaluation tool. So eventually all they'll have is the tools, because they won't need us anymore. So it's certainly not about creating dependency. It's about whoever is using it to maximise their capacity to then go on using it themselves.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.